With so many opinions being shared on who is Jesus, whom do we trust? Well, actually, we live in the age of opinions. Now, some people will say that we live in the information age. Well, sort of. And they'll say that the internet is the reason for that. Anybody can access all kinds of information on the internet. But it's not just about information, it's actually about opinions. I think we live in the age of opinions, and any one of us can share our opinions on anything on the internet, and it can be read or seen practically around the world. So this is truly the age of opinions, and so people have opinions on all kinds of things, masks or no masks, vaccines or no vaccines. Jesus, who is he? All kinds of things people will share their opinions on. And so these are the days of opinions. So how do we navigate this in our day? How do we navigate all these opinions? And one thing we want to ask too is, do these opinions even matter? There are certain opinions on things. We can have opinions on things that matter, and other things might not matter. For example, who will win the Stanley Cup this year? Now, you might have an opinion on that. You might not care. I have an opinion on that, and I do care. It matters to me. But how much does it matter to me? Well, it might matter to me now, but 100 years from now, will it matter to me? Probably not. And we have a great many opinions, sometimes strongly held opinions on a great many things that we hold to strongly right now, and we try to get everybody else to agree with us right now, that 100 years from now simply will not matter at all. Is there anything that will matter to us in 100 years? Well, how about the question, who is God? What is God like? Is there God? That's a question that will matter in 100 years. That's a question that will matter to us in 1,000 years. Even when so many of the things we hold opinions on right now will not matter then. The question about who is God and what is he like, it matters greatly now because it impacts our life now, but it will also matter to us greatly in 100 years, 1,000 years. What are our opinions on these things? It really matters. If the Muslims are correct and Islam is correct, if that's the proper vision of who God is, then that should matter to us now. That will change how we live right now. If atheists are correct in their vision of reality, that should matter to us now. We will change what we say and how we live right now. If Christianity is more true than the others, if Christianity's vision of who is God, and if Jesus is the best representation of God that we've ever seen, then that's going to matter incredibly to us now. It's going to change how we live, how we think, and it's going to matter to us 100 years from now. So with there being different opinions, how do we navigate all that? And maybe today we can actually narrow it down, not just to think of what is God like, but let's just focus in on Jesus. With there being different opinions about Jesus, who is Jesus really? Some people share the opinion he's just a myth, it didn't even exist. Others will share the opinion that, sure, there was Jesus, but Christians came along and changed him, turned him from just a mere man, Jesus, into divine Christ, through teaching things about him that simply weren't true. So that's an opinion that's out there. Is that correct? Or is the traditional Christian teaching that Jesus is who he was? He truly did live as a man, but also truly as God. Which opinion is correct? And how do we navigate that? Well, opinions mattered in the days of John writing 1 John. That's what we're looking into today. And there were opinions being spread amongst people there about who Jesus is and was. There were opinions being spread that John had to write to the Christians and say to them, hold up, let's make sure that you get this right. Because there are opinions there, but we want to make sure that we're believing and knowing what's true. So let's dig in and see what John has to say to the early Christians back Asia Minor, probably present-day Turkey. Let's see what John has to say to them and encouraging them as they have people sharing opinions about who Jesus is. So let's take a look. We'll go to chapter 2, verse 18 in 1 John. And so, children, it is the last hour. Now, not get stuck up on that last hour thing. We, in our Western ways of thinking, we hear last hour and we literally think of an hour space of time, and we think of the very last one. The ancient peoples didn't think like that. When they talk about the last hour, they're really talking about an age. The last hour could last 2,000 years, as it already has. It could last 4,000 years, who knows? Basically, the last age is what he's speaking about. Children, it is the last hour. As you have heard that Antichrist is coming, and immediately our minds might go to a very popular teaching about the Antichrist that will come at the end of time, and so we want to know about that. But that's really not what John is speaking about here, because he's going to speak to us about, never mind the Antichrist, let's talk about Antichrists, plural. So as you know and have heard that Antichrist is coming, so now many Antichrists have come. From this we know that it is the last hour. They went out from us, but they did not belong to us, for if they had belonged to us, they would have remained with us. What's he speaking about there? Here John is referring to a group of people who were bringing false teachings into the Christian community. And biblical scholars think that these were Gnostic teachers, which was becoming a prevalent a way of thinking back in that time. It was basically in its infancy in those days, but would grow into a more full-blown philosophy and way of looking at things, a religion in itself, a worldview. So this Gnostic way of looking at things, where anything spiritual is good, but anything physical is bad. And so there was a group of people who hung out with the early Christians, but they had this Gnostic way of thinking. So when they hear about Jesus, and they hear about the things Jesus is teaching, like things like, I am the light, I am the true light, things like that would resonate with the way they're already thinking. And so what they did was basically they hijacked Jesus. So they're in their way of thinking, their Gnostic way of thinking, and they take Jesus and try to fit him in to their way of thinking. Now to do that, they have to basically change Jesus from whom John was saying Jesus is and was. So basically they're making Jesus fit their way of thinking rather than changing their way of thinking to go with who Jesus really is and was. And so John is speaking to the readers here saying, watch out for these antichrists. Now the word anti there in the Greek, it literally means instead of or against. And so these people who are giving you a vision of Jesus that isn't correct, they're using their own philosophy instead of who Jesus really is. They're antichrist, they're against Christ. And he says that they went out from us, but they didn't belong to us. If they did belong to us, they would have remained with us. And we might think geography there, that they went out from us, literally. But it's probably more about separating out from us, that they were with the Christian community, but their vision of reality didn't match up with what the early Christians were saying, so they went out from John's Christian community. But as John's pointing out here, they weren't really amongst us anyway. They weren't part of us anyway. They were never really Christians in the first place, because again, they were really thinking these other ways and trying to get Jesus to fit what they already thought, rather than changing their thinking to match who Jesus really is. So that's why they were from us, but not of us. That's why he says that about them. And so how are the early Christians supposed to deal with this then? Well, John goes on to tell us. So let's read from verse 22. Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? In other words, who's the one who's spreading falsehood here, but the one who's saying that Jesus isn't really the Messiah, the rightful Lord? This is the Antichrist, the one who says Jesus isn't Lord, Messiah, the one who denies the Father and the Son. So not only is are they denying Jesus, but they're denying actually God the Father too. Again, they're a really Gnostic way of thinking that doesn't include the Old Testament and how what God was doing in the Old Testament times was pointing to Jesus, and how Jesus fulfilled all that, and how Jesus came as a man in flesh. Again, they're thinking that only spiritual things are good, flesh is bad, so they really try to change Jesus. But here is John, as an eyewitness who was with Jesus during Jesus' ministry, was with Jesus, heard his teaching, saw the kinds of things he did, watched him die, but also experienced him risen from the dead. So here is John, who knows what he's talking about when he talks about Jesus. And here are these false teachers who have opinions about Jesus, but their opinions are not matching reality. They're denying who Jesus really is. So how are the early Christians to deal with that then? Well, John says to them basically, you already know the truth. So don't worry about their opinions, because you already know what's real and what's not. And so he says that. Let's look at verse 20. But you have been anointed by the Holy One, and that means they've received the Holy Spirit. And all of you have knowledge. I write to you not because you do not know the truth, but because you know it. And you know that no lie comes from the truth. In other words, you've already experienced the truth. You've already come to know who Jesus is and what he's like. So these people coming with their opinion based on a Gnostic way of thinking, you know that's not right. And he goes on to say to them, let's go to verse 26. I write these things to you concerning those who would deceive you. So that's this Gnostic group of teachers trying to change Jesus and trying to change the people. And they're coming along saying, we need to teach you deeper, further things about Jesus that you don't know. So John writes, as for you, the anointing that you received from him abides in you, and so you do not need anyone to teach you. But as his anointing teaches you about all things and is true and is not a lie, and just as it is taught in you, just as it has taught you, abide in him. So he's basically saying, you don't need these guys to come along and teach you further things. You already know the truth. If we can use an illustration here, it's as if they have been part of the jury. And imagine that you're part of a jury and that you've already looked at all the evidence that's been carefully collected and carefully presented so that you could see the evidence and follow the evidence to the appropriate conclusion. So you've sifted through all that careful evidence, and then somebody comes along, hands you a tabloid with this sensationalist headline of the shocking truth about the case that you're actually working on. And do you go with that tabloid, or do you go with that carefully sorted, carefully thought out, and carefully presented evidence? And so the Christians that John is writing to here, it's like, you know the truth. You've already followed the evidence. You've already learned from me and probably other apostles too who have shared the evidence. And so go with what you know. Don't allow these people who have an opinion about Jesus distract you from that. But rather, don't trust what they're saying about Jesus. Don't trust what they're saying about Jesus, but actually just continue to trust in Jesus yourself. So that's why it says, abide in them. So from verse 24, let what you heard from the beginning abide in you. If what you heard from the beginning abides in you, then you will abide in the Son and in the Father. So let this gospel message about who Jesus is, let that abide in you. And then abide in the Son, and you'll be abiding in God. And also in verse 28 there, and now little children, abide in him. Abide in him. So these people are coming with this opinion. Don't trust their opinion. You already know the truth. Continue to abide in Jesus. So what about in our day then, when we have these opinions about Jesus? Some people saying, Jesus never even existed. Very few people say that, by the way. Historians basically say, no, that doesn't work by the standards of figuring out history. But there are those who say, okay, Jesus existed, but he was just a mere man, and all that supernatural stuff, that was added on to him later. Should we trust that opinion? Well, notice what's happening there is very much the same thing as what's happening when we have these Gnostic ways of thinking, and they look at Jesus and they try to fit Jesus into their thinking rather than changing their thinking to trust in Jesus. So there are those who come and look at Jesus, but they already have their minds made up on how they think about things, that There's no such thing as supernatural occurrences. And so, therefore, when you read about Jesus and when you read about the supernatural things that Jesus did, the miracles and the healing and even the teaching, the resurrection for sure of Jesus from the dead, when you see those things, you say, well, okay, there was Jesus, but that must have been made up. So you see what they're doing there is they're going from the way they already think and they're trying to fit Jesus into the way that they think. And so therefore they're giving their opinion based on what they've already thought, rather than changing what they think and following the evidence on who Jesus is. Now, is there evidence on who Jesus is? Well, there always has been, and the early readers of John would have known it because they had John there as an eyewitness plus other apostles who were eyewitnesses, who spent time with Jesus. There, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, that there were like 500 people that some of whom are still alive. Go check with them, their stories. If you follow that through in 1 Corinthians 15, you'll see how Paul highlights those who have seen Jesus risen from the dead. So there's this whole community of people willing to give their lives for this testimony, willing to die for, I know Jesus. He's risen from the dead, and therefore that has changed everything for us. It has given us the real representation of who God is among us and what God is like. It has spoken to us about His grace, His love, the forgiveness of sin. It matters to us now, and it will matter to us 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, and into eternity. And they were willing to give their lives for that testimony. And we in the New Testament, well, we have in the Old Testament too, it points to Jesus. But in the New Testament, those who collected together the writings that now make up our New Testament, the standard was that these writings had to be identified as being ones that would go back to the apostles, that in some way there was a strong link to the apostles who knew what they were talking about, who were the eyewitnesses. So they do stand, therefore, the New Testament writings as a good testimony, like in a court of law, a good testimony as to who Jesus is. And so follow the evidence. And there are many people who have followed the evidence. We can think of Lee Strobel, who was a journalist who basically wanted to prove that his wife was wrong in becoming a Christian, that he was right in being an atheist, and through his investigation became a Christian. There are others, J. Warner Wallace, who is a cold case detective, well used to handling old evidence, and really it just rang true to him, so he followed the evidence. C.S. Lewis, as a thinker and one who was used to reading literature and had a love for literature, in getting into the Bible and the New Testament, became a Christian, called himself the most reluctant convert in all of England because he really didn't want to become a Christian, but he was convinced. He followed the evidence where it led. And there's so many stories like that of people who followed the evidence. Josh McDowell, in writing the book Evidence That Demands a Verdict, expecting at one point of his life that the evidence would point to not following Jesus, but the book really is about the evidence that demands a verdict. And he is now a Christian. So we can look at all these different people and stories of people who have followed the evidence. I myself have done a sermon series that was called Compelling. That's still available to read through the shrunk sermons, and so I'll leave a link somewhere to be able to look that up. How Jesus and Christianity, it's compelling because it's both beautiful and it's also believable. And so follow the evidence. In following the evidence, this is something we do all the time. Now, most of you know that I love spring. Why? Because I love motorcycling. But I also love summer because I love windsurfing too. Not that I'm good at it, but I do love to do it. And spring, the water's a bit too cold. But summer, I like to windsurf in the summer. So somebody might say to me, somebody might give me their opinion on the lake that I go windsurfing in. And they might say, Clark, you really shouldn't go windsurfing in that lake because it's infested with great white sharks. And we know how often you fall off the windsurfer, which that part certainly is true. That's not mere opinion, that is fact. But they might say to me, don't go windsurfing because we want you to stay safe and not be eaten by a shark. What do I do with that opinion that has been expressed to me? Again, I follow the evidence. You can look up what kind of fish live actually in that lake. You can look that up. What kind of fish are we likely to find in a Canadian lake? Also, people that have been swimming in that lake for years, what's it like? Follow the evidence. And then, of course, myself someday, go into the water, trusting the evidence, following the evidence, and then discovering for myself that it's true. And that's a lot like Christianity. Follow the evidence. Where does it lead? And there are so many people willing to say, boy, it leads to a good place. Think of a verse, though, in the Bible that says, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Try it for ourselves and discover that the amazing difference it makes to us in bringing us hope, in showing us a different way of live, the way of the cross, the way of forgiveness, the way of grace. It's such a beautiful vision of life and how to live. Again, it's compelling because it's beautiful and believable. But taste and see that the Lord is good. And it's going to matter to us. It's going to matter to us now because it is life-changing when we trust in Jesus and when we follow in his way of the cross. When we pick up a cross and follow, that changes the way we live. It changes life. It changes the vision of what life can be about. But it's also going to matter to us 100 years from now, 200 years from now, 1,000 years from now, when we discover that God's passion is to love us and to be with us in relationship. And when we discover that relationship, we can have that right now and experience that right now. And in 100 years, we're going to enjoy that relationship still. In 1,000 years, we'll enjoy that relationship still. 10,000 years, we'll still enjoy that relationship. And through forever. It's something that matters now and will always matter to us. It's so important. So in conclusion then, what do we do with all these opinions about Jesus and about God? Let's not settle for opinions about Jesus. Let's pursue Jesus.